Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Doctor2Doctor in the Chatroom here on 94.7 FM. We are so very thankful that you are here to join us another Saturday. You can continue to join and support us each Saturday at this time. If you are in the listening area, just dial us up on 94.7 FM. Or if you are outside the listening area, just feel free to join us at WOJG.com. You can stream live there. No matter where you are, we come to you. And as always, we thank you for coming back each Saturday, same chat channel, same chat time at 2 p.m. to talk with us about relevant topics that impact our communities and our world. As always, we say to you, stay safe. We are still in the midst of a pandemic and we want you guys to be safe and just wear your mask. If you decide to congregate in large crowds and get out and enjoy your friends and family, wear those masks, get vaccinated unless you cannot for some reason, get your boosters unless you cannot for some reason, and just stay safe as you try to enjoy this thing called life. I am so happy to have my illustrious co-host, Dr. Nicole West. She is in the chat room. How are you today, ma'am?
Ma'am, I'm good. I'm happy to be here. How you feeling today?
I'm doing well. It's been a whirlwind of a weather thing. You know, we have some bipolar weather, but yeah, I've been working with it though. I keep a jacket with me just in case it decides to change while I'm in the grocery store or something.
Yes, I keep a jacket, a blanket, for some reason, a pair of shoes in the car. Yep. I woke up yesterday and not realizing we were under a, well, no, this is a couple days ago. We were under a tornado warning.
Yeah.
And I always get those two mixed up. So I'm like, oh Lord, do I need to do anything? And then
what does that mean? Yeah. Might even have to take a little portable fan with you because it might end up being some beach weather.
You never know.
But I am so excited about our topic today, and I'm even more excited about our guest. I have a wonderful person here with us today that's going to discuss one of our relevant topics that truly does impact our communities and our world, our youth. Our youth are our precious commodity, I always say, and our young generation of today are just brilliant people with so many creative ideas. And even with all of that said, and I often say, well, you know, they have so much access, unlike my generation. So, but even with that, we know that there are sometimes deficiencies, right? And many of those deficiencies are sometimes a result of access, environment, exposure. So, you know, and because of that, sometimes our youth are involved in our juvenile justice system. And many of those youth who are involved in the system have experienced trauma, including community violence, abuse, neglect, racial trauma even, and discrimination. And even just being in the system itself has been a traumatic experience for some of our youth. And we want to talk about that today and put our focus towards our youth, at-risk youth in particular, and just shed some light on how our youth become at risk and, you know, what can we do to change that and at least, you know, reduce recidivism for those that have been involved in the system. So we have just a person to talk with us about that today, Mrs. Kimbrell Owens. She is from the Office of Detention Alternatives Initiative in Memphis, Shelby County, and she has agreed to talk with us and kind of chop it up on this topic today. Hello, my friend, how are you?
Hello, Doctor2Doctors. How are you all this afternoon?
We're doing good. We started off with some technical difficulties today, but I think we've got it all figured out, and we are happy that you are here to talk with us. We just want you to start by telling us a little bit about you and your role with the juvenile justice system. Let's just start there.
All right, well, like you stated, I am the JDAI coordinator or Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative coordinator here at Juvenile Court. My duties include for me to create those alternatives and work with partners and agencies in the community. See if we can create those alternatives to detention for those youth that are that doesn't need to be in the system. We do know at times they're going to be there are instances where we have to put youth in detention, because of the charges. But there's other times, so we can try to, work as hard as we can to create those things that can keep those youth outside the system, so they can stay in the community with their families and in school systems and things of that nature. So I work with the community as much as possible so that we can get those alternatives created. It's a hard job because, as you know, we have to. The first things, first and foremost, and our priority is to ensure that the community is safe. We have to do to keep the community safe. So we don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize that. But we also know that part of our community is our youth. And so we definitely want to keep their mindset safe and don't interject them into a system that could traumatize them. So that's what I do in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's a great segue into where I wanted to go. So trauma-informed approaches are being discussed in like multiple child serving systems across whether education, mental health, welfare, and justice as central approaches to providing effective care. So can you tell us what trauma-informed means in this context with our juvenile justice system and why it's important?
For a long time, and you guys have been in the system, been in the community and working and knowing what our youth are dealing with. For a long time, we didn't realize that trauma was a part of it. Sure. We knew that they were dealing with things. We have a lot of youth that walk over dead bodies, and to them that's normal, and go on to go to school, or things happen, and we were not recognizing that that's a problem until we start dealing with things like ACEs and adverse childhood experiences. That once we start dealing with that mindset and what was happening, we started transforming and trying into the realm of trauma. We had to start recognizing that it was occurring and it was a part of affecting our youth. So being informed now is what we're doing, is we're going deeper and just not trying to see what's wrong with the kids, but trying to see as educators, as juvenile workers working in juvenile systems in the community, trying to get others informed to understand that a part of what's happening with our youth and with all others too is that there's some underlying issues with trauma that we all need to be informed about. So that's why it's so important now that you see so much training this out. We're training our judges, our magistrates, our defense attorneys, our prosecutors now to understand that we start looking at that piece too before we start making the hard judgment on these youth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so speaking to that training, right? Is there like this shared vocabulary now around these issues and around trauma-informed approaches, and what's working best for our youth that are at risk?
Well, all I can say now, we do have several different tools that we have the cans, we have the I think it's the CAS or CAS 2 or something like that we utilize, but we're still new to it. Trauma, everything we're new to it. So that right now is we're just trying to get the basis of this. First of all, recognizing. Second is getting people trained, because it's like changing the mindset. Because it was something we had never dealt before. Mental illness is one of those things that we too still are learning about, as when to identify, when not to identify, when to utilize the trauma aspect, when to utilize there being a mental illness. So we're still at the phase of really trying to identify when is necessary and when is not, and not that it's for everybody. Everybody doesn't need the same thing. So I think the basis of what we're doing now. So to answer your question, there's not a overall arching thing that says everybody, are on the same playing field with trauma. But I will say this, when it comes to trauma, everybody now is trying to get into the game of being more knowledgeable about it.
Okay. So what do you think and I know Dr. West was going to ask something, I'm sorry. What do you think are some of the potential limitations to those trauma-informed approaches?
I think just knowledge. I think we're still skeptical of, just because when it comes to youth, I'm really just talking about the youth. When it comes to the youth, We're skeptical because we don't want to overshadow everything just saying it's a trauma. or overshadowing. Just, we have to still look at what has happened with the child, what has happened with the charge, what, and who did they harm if they harm somebody and things of that nature. So getting us, first getting us trained on it, but also recognizing that we got to look at more things than just that one portion of that puzzle.
And just so we don't leave our audience hanging, you mentioned the cans, and you don't have to talk about the cans in detail, but I would just like you to kind of let our audience know what that is. It's a tool. It's a tool that, and it has a lot of questions on it. It's sort of like if anybody knows about the ACEs questions, it does the same thing. It kind of goes down and just kind of see, if they've ever had trauma in a household, if they ever saw their mom being hurt or had been abused. So they're just kind of asking those questions just to see, how deep, if there's any trauma and if it needs to be addressed.
Yeah. You know what? I love the way that you phrased something a minute ago. You said everybody doesn't need the same thing. And for me, that's the essence of being trauma informed, is trying to figure out, what has this child or this family been through that might look different from another family? And then how can we put together some resources that would address their specific needs?
Absolutely.
Whereas before we weren't doing that. But what I'm wondering too is, has the trauma informed training that you all do, has it informed or changed how you approach sentencing, or some of those resources or services that you would provide a child or a family? Has being more trauma informed kind of informed how you look at that?
Yes. And you said something, I'm gonna go back to it, but yes, for a long time with our prosecutors and our defense attorneys, they were just, basic, whatever the charge was, with a sentence and move on. Now we kind of pause and say, okay, we look at, psychological things. We look at also, we may look at a trauma report or look at what's happened to the child. And then we start making more of those. We have a department here called ENR, our Evaluation and Referral Services here. And what they do, they have a whole list of resources. So before a charge sometimes is rendered, or not a charge, but a sentence is rendered on a child, what usually happens is they will maybe get with one of those representatives just to see what resources are out there before, to see what can help. Just kind of pull back. We kind of pull back a little bit before we move forward now, to try to see what resources can be available and can help the whole family, not just the child, but the entire family, because that's going to be another show that I have to come on and talk about the family and the parents, but that's a whole nother show. But we definitely do a lot. I can see now with the way that we adjudicate our cases here is that we kind of pull back before we go into that final thing to see if we can, the final sentence, to see if we can find some resources that help that child.
Yeah. That's awesome. I'm assuming we weren't doing that before. We were just kind of blanket, sentence depending on the charge.
Well, not so much. It wasn't so much even blanket. It was just more of, was trying to find things, but there weren't so many things out there because we weren't so informed. We were always trying to help, but we didn't know the extent of the help. And so once we started getting more trauma informed, more resources became available. I mean, we're still lacking. The judges still have a certain amount of tools in their toolbox that they can, utilize, but they do now try to go and say, okay, well, what can we do? What can we help? I know a lot of times we have parents calling and saying, we have, youth that's been in detention for a period of time, but a lot of times what's happening is not that they're trying to keep them there longer, but they're trying to see how much they can do, what all they can do to assist. And sometimes it takes longer, and we hate to leave a child in detention or to try to keep them there, but sometimes it's the only way just to get them all the resources that's maybe necessary for them and their family.
Yeah, and now we're moving towards, as you said, like having these intersections between, mental health, the judges, the court systems, and everybody. This is not just a buzzword or a buzz phrase, trauma informed. Everybody's trying to buy into the idea of being trauma informed in terms of how we approach what we do for for at-risk youth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I,
So speaking of at-risk youth, most of us have heard the term, right, at risk.
Mhm.
And I just kind of want to break down what that really means, but I want you to tie in not just the at-risk factors, but the protective factors, right? Just tie it all together and help it to make sense for our audience.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. At risk are those youth that are on the, they may have been in the system, or they could be at risk of being in the system. And usually what happens is, if they have been in our system, maybe they could have just did something, get a summons. They didn't even make it to detention, but they have that that tarnished thing on them as far as a charge. And it could be a simple charge, but now we want to get to the point of understanding what's happening to this child now and how far we need to go to help this particular child. And so that's where the protective factors come, because if they just hit our system the first time and didn't even make it to detention, but they got a summons or they got probation. Okay, so now it's time to start working with this child, because we don't want that at-risk child become the risk child. Where they are, the crimes or the charges become escalated more and more. And we've seen that in the past. And so with the protective factors come with probation, our probation officers will come into play and to help to start deciding on, okay, before this child get too far into any system, let's see what we can do to assist. And so we have so many different resources that we have. We have a youth court here that, just say if they had a minor charge, they can go and go to the youth court, and it's tried by their peers, and that they have light adjudications on them. And the usually is something, it could be like shoplifting, and you may have the other peers that's going to be the prosecutor. They'll be the judge. They don't want to be the judge, but they'll be the defense attorneys. So they play all those roles in it, but it gives them just a way to be in the system, but not be in the system, and also to be held accountable. The biggest thing is holding them accountable, and so that if they do come in the system at an early point and they become at risk, then we know that we can now have something to assist them with as they move forward in the community, so they won't go too deep.
I know we're probably coming up on a break really soon, but when we come back on the other side of the break, I'd really like for you to talk about at risk and what it looks like, what kinds of things do we see with the youth, right? Whether it's youth that may be in poverty or so forth and so on, and some of the common things that we see when we say, at-risk youth. And maybe even some of the things that once kids are, the kids that you actually work with, and some of the things that you hear, some of the things that they talk about. I don't know. Hopefully we're going to talk about the resources that, that are provided for these youth or whatever. And some of the things that you guys are finding as you work with these kids. I don't know if there's research being done or anything of that nature, but let's talk about that on the other side of the break. We'll be right back on 94.7 FM. And we are still here on 94.7 FM. We are here with Ms. Kimbrell Owens, and we are talking about our at-risk youth, our youth that have been involved in the juvenile justice system. I wanted you to talk about some of those common things that you see with youth that have been involved in the system as it relates to at-risk factors.
All right. Well, the biggest thing, and I want the community to know, and you all as well too, is that our biggest charge we're dealing with right now is carjackings. And it's huge right now. And I mean, really, really, really huge. We're all trying to work around. I mean, of course, gun charges are always huge, because we know we don't want kids to ever be dealing with guns, or with any firearms. But carjacking is huge right now. It's for our at-risk youth. Stealing cars, breaking into cars, all of that. And so that's one of the big things right now for the year for me that I'm working on, trying to find alternative solutions, research that can help us deal with those particular individuals that we don't know why they're doing that. We're trying to figure that out. But I do want to, if the community are out there at a large that are listening, if you have solutions to help with that. The other thing, of course, always is gun charges. We're trying to see, we do have a program here called Ceasefire, which is really good.
Mhm.
And just to talk about Ceasefire just for a second, Ceasefire they have, they meet every month with those youth that has been charged with some kind of firearm charge. And they bring in the police department, they bring in mentors, they bring in guest speakers, sometimes they may bring in a nurse who deals with the traumas of seeing those people being shot at the hospital, just to kind of give these youth and their families, the families have to be there too, use their parents, and the child has to be there. And they get to hear firsthand of what, using a firearm is doing to people. It's not just something that, you shoot and nothing happens. It affects their entire families a lot of times. And that's a part of the trauma too. You're just not, not being traumatized yourself, but you're traumatizing other families along the way as you're doing that. So we have that program. That's a great resource that we have and we utilize here. But as far as your question as to at-risk youth, the factors that we see, a lot of times what you see is the parental, what's happening in the home, what's happening at the school. A lot of our youth, they have been suspended so many times. And so if they're not at school, what are they going to do? And if we continue to put them outside the school and we don't, try to find a way to keep them in the school, then what do we think they're going to do? If their parents have to work or they have several children they have to care for and things of that nature, we have to find those ways that we can keep them in the school, or keep them off the street and keep them busy. And that's another thing that I try to work on too, is dealing with our mayors and our leaders to try to see what we put in our communities, because some of the kids just talked about recently is that they didn't have a community pool in South Memphis. Like they're like, just give us a pool, give us something that we could do. And those are the simple things that we see that is happening. So we are trying to just find those things that, we can, the risk factors for our youth and what's happening with them is more than just surface level. Yeah. And some of it that we can, and some of it we won't be able to reach, because you can't go in and, if I help one child and I send them back to their home and the home is still the same, it's nothing I can do with that, but I can do the most I can. And that's why, we're going to try to find those ways that we can help the entire family as much as possible.
I remember my dad always saying when I was growing up, it all starts in the home, and he had this way of saying it that was just so funny to me, but it's true now that I'm, older and can kind of look back. Do you think that, is it the lack of education that you would say is like the root of this, or is it the lack of community resources or lack of jobs in our communities, or is it a combination of a lot of things?
As the kids say, all of it.
All of it.
It is. It really is, Dr. West. Honestly, you stated it best earlier. It's different strokes for different folks, I may need something that you don't need. Like I've found that sometimes some parents because they didn't value education or they dropped out, that's not something they're going to try to push their child for. And because sometimes eating is more important than somebody's going to school or buying some school clothes, things of that nature. So it's different. So that's why it's a community effort to see what's needed for each family. It's hard for people just to say, yeah, do this, or it's just the trauma, or it's just the education. It's not. Everybody desires something else. And most of our youth that we talk to, a lot of them trying to make some money. Yeah, they need some money. They trying to provide for their family. They're trying to get a quick lick, as they say. All of that. They're trying to do what they, and if we can get them some employment, is it going to be good enough for them? Because is it going to be fast money? It's going to be slow money. So
because is it going to equate with what they can do in the streets, right?
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes. So you're right. And all we can do is what we can do. But I think what you guys are doing with this platform is the beginning. Dr. Shaw called and he was asking me to come on, and she's asked 100 years ago. So, and we finally
make that clear. Let's be clear.
And so this is what's needed. You want to know what's needed? This is what's needed. Continue to help and get it out to the community so they can reach out to you too and say, hey, I heard this. This is what's needed in my community. This is what's needed in my home. We have to help. And this platform is the best way to continue. If you guys don't stop what you're doing, that's definitely done needs to stop. Keep doing this.
Yeah. So, when you were talking, both of you kind of hit on resources, right? And so, I know of a lot of programs, I'll call them programs, just because of the work that I've done. How effective do you think programs are? Because, being in it, I've always felt like there are these silos and, like we were talking, I said something about the intersections between the judges and the mental health, facility, blah, blah, blah. Are we really coming together to make the work effective? To really help in our communities? Because, we can have as many programs as we can have. It's so much available, right? But does it really reach our children and families?
Some of them do. And you pointed out, that's a great point. And because we've been dealing with this for a long time, because even from Shelby County commissioners and from, the juvenile court and, other agencies, we've always tried to partner with people who have programs, because some programs do work. But the problem with some programs, people are not held accountable. You can say you have this, but are you doing this? And who's making sure and checking on this?
Wow.
So that's the only thing. Accountability is key when you have different programs. And yes, some of them are viable, some of them are not. But I would always say we have to have something, but the something has to be effective. And that's the one thing that we don't have in this community that I know of. That we have some kind of system in place where all the programs that are out there are being
evaluated in some way.
Exactly, evaluated in some kind of way so that we all know that it is effective. I don't shun on any program per se, because I do think we have to have them. But I definitely think that there has to be accountability of what we do, especially when you have our youth going. You can't say you're doing something for our youth and it's not working, so that's key.
And also, I think having those programs be able to communicate with one another about a particular family or a particular child. Otherwise, we might all be spinning our wheels in different directions trying to help the family, and none of us know. And if we all just collectively, had a family team meeting or something, some sort of way to all be on the same page, that probably would be helpful too. But like Dr. Shaw said, we're so siloed with what we do with these families that probably is a huge disadvantage, I would imagine.
I will say this, Dr. West, we are finally getting to a point where we're trying to do better with working together. We're finally trying to have those team meetings, even if it's just with, the different departments in this building, with family and different partners and agencies, things of that nature. It's starting slow, like most things do, but we are getting on that. It's going to have to be it's going to take some time. I'll just put it that way. But I will say we're finally realizing that it's going to be key, just like they would if a child goes to the doctor and he goes to a GI doctor and he has to go to a different specialist or whatever. It's the same way when it comes to our youth and our families. It's not all the way there yet, but we are gaining on it. I'll have to say that.
That's good. That's good.
Are we doing a better job at alternatives for our youth? As opposed.
I think I know the answer just based on her body language.
Well, she almost did the exorcism on me, and I was like, okay, that's a good question. I worked in the school system years ago, And I remember the SHAPE program, right? And that being an alternative. And, but I also remember that there were some people that weren't open to that. I mean, sometimes, the adults get a little frustrated with the kids that reoffend, whether that be in the classroom or whether they are offending in the communities, right? And it's like, okay, they've done this so many times, they've been expelled, and we've suspended, we've had in-school suspension, and now, no. They want something done, something rigorous and, firm. How do you feel about the alternative programs and, giving our children those opportunities?
Well, I know about the SHAPE program very well. It was around when it kind of almost started. So, I mean, and it's still available. It's a still great program because it's a program.
That's just one of the ones that I remember.
But it is. And to your point, when it comes to alternatives, and that was huge for us when we first got into doing this work, because as I stated before, is that some people don't take well to youth not getting the hammer, as they say. They want them to get the hammer and to go to detention. They don't care what they've done, what has happened. They want them in, as they say, in jail. We don't call it jail for you, but they want them in jail and locked up because they committed a crime. But to you guys' topic today, we have to understand, first and foremost, they're youth. They're gonna do dumb stuff. We did dumb stuff. I mean, we may have stole some at the store. We didn't, some candy. We didn't get caught, and we went home, and some people didn't. And I think that's the problem. Now, don't get me wrong. There's definitely some crimes that you just can't get around. And we're gonna
far more severe. That's right.
Right.
Very, very much so. But to your point, yes, a lot of times when you're trying to create an alternative, you have some people that's just like, no. We know that they committed a crime. They should do the time, and that's it. They don't think about they're a child. They don't think about there's some trauma in there. They don't think there's some issues. There's some underlying issues. It's some mental illness. There's some education, some lack of education there. All of that. And so as we start creating, what I start doing now as we are trying to create alternatives to detention is put it on their doorstep. If I can get people to see it from their perspective, how could they help and how can they keep it from their doorstep, then you get more people trying to help. Because if you think about this child as being your child, your niece, your nephew, what do you want to happen to them? Would you want us to give them the hammer, or would you want us to assist in some way? So that's how now it's still hard because people are not coming. They're still reluctant to come and try to assist when it comes to alternatives and more resources. But I will say this: when you let them know and see that, hey, this child could be stealing from your company, your business, then they're a little more like, well, what can I do to help? And so that's how we have to kind of address it there. And I do think now what we have, because of all the youth crime that has came out since COVID, the numbers have skyrocketed. And if I had time, I would have just been able to let you guys see just how, during COVID, of course, everybody was no touch. So a lot of our youth were not being, they were actually just being placed, just given summons if they committed the crimes and sent on home. But now it's like they're doing so much. Our detention center numbers are really up lately because with the crime that is happening. So, but we got to keep moving forward. We can't stop. It's necessary. It's needed. So I'm in it. I'm all about creating those things. It's not that we have a million of them, but the ones we do have, they do work. One of them that we've created, it's called our Expediter. And the juvenile court came, they had it at other sites. You have different JDAI sites around the country, and we're one of them. And so we have an Expediter here. And what she does is it's sort of like a spinoff of what I do. So what she does is look at our report of all those youth that are in detention and say, hey, this young man, it's his first time here. Let's see what can I do to get him out? What can be done? Then she goes, and we talk about sitting around the table. Then we get with the prosecutor, we get with the defense attorney, we get with the judge, we get with the parents. We get with, if they have a church member or a pastor, whoever we can get to come talk on behalf of that child, to see what resources they have to assist to get them out so they can get back in the community. And that has been working really well, because a lot of times if they're in detention, usually they have to wait for their detention hearing. But if the expert can work with them to just say, what can we do to get them out right now? Then that usually what happens. And it usually works out really, really well, because the judges love just sitting down, just talking about a child and hearing about them on a personal level.
Mm-hmm. And you know, you hit on this earlier, and it made me think of, you know, in this world, and we do mental health a lot on this show. You know, when you say just, you know, we have to know a little bit of the background, and I know there's an element of confidentiality, right? But, you know, if we could stop looking at the child as to what's wrong with them and start thinking about what may have happened to them. And if we could really know the background of that child that may have been molested, you know, or raped, or, you know, I had a student once many years ago that saw his little brother over the summer, you know, witnessed the murder of his own brother. He was only an 8th grader himself. You could know that and then attach that to the situation of what's happening with this child's behavior.
Right.
You wouldn't necessarily be so quickly to say, you know, I want them to have the hammer.
And that's a good point too, because I think educators are, a lot of times they get so frustrated because they want the kids to sit there with their hands on their desk and listen to them and don't move. And they don't understand that that child has been through a lot. And we have to do, we've worked with the school system so much, just try to get them to understand this. Suspension and expulsions are not always the answer. I mean, I know you're tired of, I know that this child has, you know, came up with this, you know, with these issues, but we have to do more than just, you know, putting the hammer down.
Yeah. Well, let's talk more on the other side of break. We will be right back in just a moment on Doctor2Doctor in the Chatroom. See you in a moment. And we're back on 94.7 FM. We are here with Ms. Kimbrell Owens. We are talking about our youth, our at-risk youth, our youth that have been involved in the juvenile justice system. I wanted you to just talk a little more about the COVID piece and how that's impacted our youth. And then maybe we can move a little bit into the reentry piece. And I think Dr. West wanted to ask something too, but let's just start with COVID. How has that impacted this whole thing called, you know, the juvenile justice system?
Well, I have to say, during the COVID months, our numbers, when crime numbers were down immensely when it came to youth crime. I mean, our numbers had never been that low since I have been here. We may have only had, usually we have between probably 60 to 80 kids maybe in our detention facility, but we only may have had 20 or 30. And so what I did was, on one of our meetings that I had with the law enforcement, I asked them, because I wanted to know why the numbers were so low. You know, because I knew crime, I'm not saying crime had went away, but I knew, you know, they're not just, you know. So they said that what was happening was, it was the contact. They had less contact with them as much as possible. Like, it was like they saw them, but they tried as much as possible, if they could do something to get them back home and not necessarily drive them down to the detention facility, if they could give them a summons per se, then that's what they were doing. Now, when everything kind of opened back up, you could start seeing slightly our numbers are going back up, because they knew then everything you can't give a summons for, mostly because summonses are most about for misdemeanor, maybe jaywalking, vandalism, something of that nature, you know, low charges. But so as the charges start getting more and more, like I told you guys, with the carjackings and the, you know, the gun charges and things like that, it's like, soon as they said that we can go back outside to play,
as soon as outside open back up.
And I tell you right now, our numbers are, I'm telling, they're escalating. I mean, on all levels that we can see when it comes to our juvenile crime. So I'll have to say, when it came to COVID, it was a it was good and bad, of course. Of course, we didn't want anybody to have COVID and then have to be in the house like that, but it helped because it kept our numbers down. And, but for the most part, now since everything's back open, we are back seeing the same thing as far as the crime in our detention centers and all around.
Were you guys able to keep the COVID cases down during that time?
Oh, yeah, now it's our detention center, which is ran by our sheriff department, Sheriff Bonner, under his leadership. They did an awesome, I have no idea how they did it, but they had a system in place where, the kids would come in and they would be isolated just for a second. They would get tested. So they had no cases of COVID inside during the COVID months. I hadn't checked with them like in the last couple of months to see if they had any breakout, but they did. I mean, they did amazing. I mean, to the point where we had other sites calling us, asking us, what were we doing? Because
that's pretty phenomenal.
They did a phenomenal job, even with their officers that were, in charge of caring for the youth that were in detention. They made sure that everybody, the kids were even in there wiping things down and things like that. So I have no idea how they did it, but they did very well.
And that was no cases for staff as well as the kids that were there? Wow, that's amazing.
We did have one staff member that was, I think they were, and this may have been recent, but they may have, they were on, but they weren't in a facility. They had caught it, but they weren't they never came inside the facility. So they never made it back. Like they were outside, like on vacation or something like that. So they never came back. So they never got to the youth or came into the building to work or things like that.
Wow. That's a pretty amazing statistic to have. I don't know that there's any system within our society that can say we've had 0 COVID cases over the last 2.5 years.
Yeah,
that's amazing. Amazing. Okay. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, speaking of on the inside and being in the juvenile justice system, can we talk a little bit about the mental health piece? Because we're talking about trauma, and clearly when there's trauma, we need to address it because it, can lead to all kinds of mental health issues. So I've heard a lot of stories about being in detention and just kind of wondering what it looks like in terms of addressing our youth's mental health. Do they have counselors or therapists or psychiatrists, or, are we just kind of glossing over the fact that we need to address our youth's mental health when they're in detention?
Well, we don't have, we have counselors that the sheriff department has, but it's not as if they work with the youth every day if necessary. If the youth asks for something, or we know coming in that they need medicine and medication and things of that nature, then they get all that is taken care of. But just on a everyday basis, there's not a counselor that's on them all the time. They do get people that talk to them. The only time that they really and truly take them through a psychological exam is when their case is going before, just say, those cases that they may have to go, they're trying to see if they need to be tried as an adult.
Right.
Okay. Sometimes they will ask for a psychological evaluation just to see if they're competent enough to stand trial, things of that nature, to see what is their mental state. We do know coming in, we do ask, there's always questions on intake. When did you start, smoking? Do you smoke marijuana? When did you start smoking marijuana? Do you take any medication? Have you ever been on an IEP? Yeah, things of that nature, just to see where they are and what level they are. Sometimes that's because we have a school in our detention center called Hope Academy. Sometimes it's for that too. But as far as just having a normal everyday counselor, it's not on that basis, but there's always somebody there if they need it. That's one piece that we definitely got to get better with, but I think that's holistically on everything. I think that even for those youth that don't hit our system, they just could get probation. That's why we try to see what is happening. That's why we're still using those ACEs assessments and those trauma things, because even if they don't make it to the system as far as detention, we still have to see what's happening on the outside and what resources we can do to assist. A lot of times the parents would tell us, hey, yeah, he was diagnosed with bipolar, but he's not taking his medication. And then the child's like, well, I'm not bipolar, so that's why I'm not taking my medication. So we have all that going on. And if the judge or if the magistrate says in their order that we need this child to go to get, assistance and they may set them up for resources, then we have to kind of hold them accountable in doing that. And a lot of times it doesn't happen. Who's going to get them there? Does the parents think that is, something viable they want to do, if they, they have other things to do? So it's still a work in progress when it comes to our mental health. Everything is when it comes to mental health, trauma, all of this. It's part of the wraparound system portion of it. But you got to be able to wrap around something to have a wraparound.
Right. Yeah.
I don't want you to wrap around.
I love it.
Right. I mean,
So,
what about? Go ahead, Dr.
Go ahead.
Shaw.
No. Go ahead.
What about those youth that come in and they might express some suicidal thoughts? Do they also not have? I mean, I understand that there's a lot of youth in there, and maybe only one or two counselors, and so you can't really see everybody every day, or you can't really see everybody to the extent that they need. But I guess I'm thinking about those really critical cases, those really severe situations.
No. So with the sheriff department, there is a whole department that they have. They have mental health worker, nurses, they have that there. So it's not, if anything goes on, it's there. It's there available.
Okay.
But sometimes it's more of a, ask, and some of it is that we know from coming in. So if anybody's having anything like that, quickly it's taken care of. Even if they have to take them outside of our building to go to Lakeside or Delta or something of that nature. So no, it's we have all the resources. I will have to say, if the sheriff doesn't have anything, he has resources more than anybody do. I don't know how he get all the funds, but he has them. So they're there and they're available. He has a really great team. When you were asking that question, I thought you were like saying on a daily basis, which they don't have like every day unless sometimes it's necessary. Yeah. But things of that nature, when it comes to it, they do have a whole team in place. They have nurses on staff. They have a great director who handles all that.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So when Dr. West was asking that question, in my mind, I was thinking, in terms of when a child comes in, just by default, is there anything done? I know the ACEs is done, right? Or the CANs or whatever assessment tools that you guys use. But, if we are in a frame of mind that it's not what's wrong, it's what happened, then is there just something by default that goes on with each child? I think you're saying, no, it's as we see the need or whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, it's as the need and also the extreme of it, what's happening. Sure. If they're having some kind of manic or psychosis, things happen right when they come in, because sometimes that does happen as well too. So there's always, when especially if they're coming to detention, there's an intake process that is very very thorough. Very thorough. They go through a lot of things. So they're looking at them, they're looking at their eyes and all that, and they do have to go see the medical team. That's how we ended up with really no COVID cases, because our medical team were on site to be able to ensure what was happening, who was in isolation, things like that. So we didn't have nobody really kind of mingling with each other. So yes, there is a system in place for that. It's just that what they do with it, I'm not sure with it, as far as if they find out, if if there's mental issues happening right now, do they have to, see them every day, or that's not a portion that I'm privy to, but I can definitely get that answer if necessary.
So in terms of recidivism, how do you guys approach reducing the chances of our, youth reoffending? What kinds of things are there? Programs within,
There is.
Okay.
There is. our probation department, which is under the leadership of Dr. Bernard Williams, had really and truly did a great job of trying to, when it comes to probationers, like you got two different sides. Those in detention, you got those on probation.
Yeah.
And so what they do now is they have what they call a level of oh, you made me lose my thought. It's kind of like different levels that they come in. So if it's their first time, they may take them up and may go up and up and up. So so they do that. And so that has been very helpful, because what we were seeing at first, it was blanket. Everything was blanket. You come in, you get this. Blanket, you get this. But now, since they see the different levels, and now the approach is more hands-on. So we got two different probationary levels. You have some where you just, you kind of monitor them, make sure they're okay. And you got another where you go out to the homes, and then you go to, you're talking to them on the phone every day. You got those that are electronic monitoring. So those that are electronic monitoring, you're saying, okay, we're not going to keep you in detention, or we're not going to keep you from, being into the community, but we do have to know where you are. So what we do with that is we put you on an electronic monitor or GPS system where we kind of track where you are, and we give you leeway to go to school, go to church, or you may have to work and things like that. Other thing that we do is too, we have what we call Evening Reporting Center, or ERC. We got two different kinds. We have one that's under the agency of JIF. I hope you guys know what JIF is. Please don't make me explain what the JIF stands for. Juvenile Intervention Faith-Based something.
Yes, close.
Right. What they do is with the certain youth that are that they just need that. Sometimes you just need somewhere where you just know where they are, and they just they need some accountability. And so what they do is sometimes they'll pick them up from their home, they'll take them to the site, they give them some resources, they give them some life skills, let them eat, and then I take them back home. We know where they are, we know what they're doing. So it's keeping them out of the system and going deeper into the system because we know where they are. Then we have another one that's within our school system, and I want to say it's at Carver. And this is the first one we've ever had within the school system or at a school, or I think it's an alternative school. And they do about the same thing, but they can, on these particular youth, they do a whole lot more. I mean, they are hands-on, and they really do keep them. And these youth are always, all the ones at JIF and at Carver usually say, I don't want to, I don't want to leave, because I think they like knowing that somebody sees them. Somebody sees them, they're held accountable, they're doing something, they're not home.
That spells I care to kids, right? To children, it spells I care. Somebody cares about where I am and what I'm doing. We've got about 3 minutes, and I really wanted you to talk a little bit about reentry for these children, because we've had a couple of people come on and talk about reentry after imprisonment, but we haven't talked about our youth when they're in the system and what it's like for them going back into their schools or communities or what have you.
It's really, really hard, especially the ones have been, just say they've been in our detention center for 100 days or so. It's really, really, really hard. We do have resources in place and the one thing that we've been trying to work with is mentors to try to be there for them. And we're trying to come up with a program with not just for mentors for the youth, but for the parents too. So as far as a system wise, we don't have a huge system. We do have a pre-release class for some of our youth that have been on probation and things like that. And we just kind of ask them what they need, what do you think you're gonna need as you get back out there? Ask the parents as well too. And that's what is really a case-by-case basis. It's not a whole system or program that we're dealing with, but it's one we're working with. So as far as a reentry system, we don't have a big one right now. We kind of sometimes, especially with the ones in detention, we kind of leave it up sometimes with their attorneys to help, especially if they give a plan to the judge to say what you're going to do when this child get out, especially if I let you out, what's going to be the plan. So, so we're still working with it. And everything that I said we're working with is because we're trying to get help from everybody to help develop things that we don't have a handle on.
Sounds like that might be, a good arena for someone to tap into, reentry
Absolutely.
for our youth, because I don't think we think about them as much as we do the adults that have, so I think that's a good thing for us to really start looking at, because I think it'd be something very effective in terms of reducing recidivism, right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
and particularly in terms of mobilizing our communities.
Absolutely.
We are about out of time. I am so glad that you came to spend this time with us, and of course, there's going to be a part 2 to this show, because as you said, we want to talk about the families and the holistic side of this thing, because it involves all of us, right? It's a village thing. So we want you guys to come back and join us next week, same chat channel, same chat time, right here on 94.7 FM.